All right, welcome everyone to another installment of The Way It Is. I'm your host, Luca Andolfato with Remax Service First Realty, and we are extremely fortunate today to have a guest with us, Mr. Mike Salmon, president of LNA Mutual Insurance. Mike is, I'm fortunate to call Mike both I guess, a colleague within the industry and a friend. And Mike has given us some of his time to talk about, again, a very timely subject in real estate, even more so, though, again, because of the crazy things that are happening in our world vis-a-vis the pandemic and other things. We're going to talk about insurance and insuring homes and trying to get insurance on properties now and risk and all those kinds of things. So, Michael, welcome.
Well, thanks, Luca. Thanks for having me this morning, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
All right. So, I'll tell our listeners. So, LNA Mutual is, well, I don't know if it's the oldest. It's certainly one of the oldest insurance brokers around. You've been established in Napanee, Ontario, since 1876, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we'll start with LNA Mutual Insurance is the company. So we're not a broker. We use brokers and agents in our distribution channel, but we're the actual company itself that provides the insurance coverage. So we were started by farmers in 1876 because they couldn't get insurance. So it's an ironic twist of fate that we're talking about this today, because getting insurance in the marketplace where you live and do business is getting a little trickier because of the pace of the transactions. But farmers couldn't get insurance outside of Napanee in 1876, so they started the company. And we have evolved into a residential, automobile, and farm insurer. We do some small commercial risks as well. So, and we're proud that we've continuously been in Napanee since 1876. We're not a subsidiary or a franchise of a larger American-owned or international insurer. We're the whole company right here in Napanee.
Well, that's awesome. And I've seen some photos of the underway or newly renovated office space. I haven't had a chance to visit them yet, but I'm looking forward to that. But the photos I saw look pretty good, so that's exciting.
Yeah, we're excited about that too. We bought an old feed mill here in Napanee, right downtown, and we've been renovating it now for almost 2 years. And we're approaching the finish, which has been made difficult for obvious reasons under the last 18 months or so. But we're creeping towards hopefully a May move-in date. So that'll be exciting. And I'll send you some more photos of, the updated progress.
All right. So on to the topic at hand, which, as a realtor, in normal times or when we had the opportunity, and even new realtors getting licensed, and my two young licensed assistants now, there was always the holy trinity of conditions in an offer. You had financing, inspection, and getting insurance. And so that's gone the way of the dodo in the last 18 or 12 to 13, 15 months because of the craziness in the market, the fact that everybody has to step over everybody else to try to get a house and buy it without conditions, and so everybody's playing catch up after the fact. I know when we talked briefly about sort of the podcast, we discussed given that people are now doing this no different than their financing after the dust settles. What are, I guess, we talked about a checklist. So maybe let's just start with that. What kind of checklist should people, those buying properties now sort of have in the backs of their mind or as a standard sort of to think about when they're doing this?
It's a great question, Luca. And truthfully, I suppose consumers should start with the knowledge that insurance companies have a checklist. Okay. An immediate need checklist on whether a risk is insurable or not. And so I would recommend that potential home buyers would have their own checklist. So the start is to understand that you're going to need insurance for this place that you're buying. And it's exciting, when you're buying a house. I've gone through it myself, and you're thinking about almost everything. No one thinks about insurance. Let's be blunt. It's not, it's kind of boring.
It's not sexy. No, not at all.
But it's vital. And especially, if you're financing it, with a mortgage, you've got to have it. And so these properties homeowners should have a checklist. And so that's the start, is to just be aware that insurance is not necessarily just a given that, you go to the insurance store and, buy it like it's groceries, right?
Yeah.
But the major factors, I would start with the electrical system of whatever property you're buying. Wiring, whether it's aluminum wiring, whether it's newly renovated, an old house with new wiring is great. Whether it's a fuse panel, not a lot of companies will even insure a property that has a fuse panel now. So a homeowner should think about those things, because those are potential costs subject to an electrical safety authority inspection. You might have trouble getting insurance bound on a property, and everything else could look great about the place. So I would start with electrical systems. They're on the insurance company's checklist at the top. So yes. I would say home buyers should think about that. Heating system would be next. Insurance companies want to know what the fuel source is. Is it oil heat? Is it natural gas? Electric? Is there a wood burning appliance in it? Mm-hmm. We're worried about primary heat sources, and that might apply more to a rural property, but not always. Some older homes, even in urban centers, will be electric heat. These impact the decisions that insurance companies make when they're considering a risk. And, those come with, for example, oil tanks. You're going to need a TSSA inspection, relying on one that the listing agent or selling vendor, has. That's not going to be adequate if it's more than even 12 months old. And wood burning appliances, of course, you're going to need a wet inspection.
Yeah.
And the insurance companies, not just L&A Mutual, but any insurance company, they're going to want these confirmations that everyone's safe, that the house is insurable.
Yeah.
And, insurance companies, sometimes they get, a bad reputation because, the insurance companies don't want to do this. And we want people to be safe in their houses. We don't want you to buy a house and move in and have it burned down on you. Right. So yes, we're protecting ourselves, but we're protecting the homeowner as well. So it's just good to get in front of these things. Right? Water. We were going to talk about climate change.
Yeah.
Look, we know because next on the checklist is water exposure. Are you buying a place on a river, on a waterfront, on a lake? Are you buying a place in a low-lying area where we know there's been prior flood activity before? If you are, you could have trouble obtaining flood insurance.
Yeah.
For your water protection. So these are important considerations in the marketplace today when you're trying to, you're bidding on properties and it's moving literally by the hour.
Yeah, and so maybe I'm just going to jump in there for a second, and for people listening or watching, there was a bunch of acronyms that got thrown out there, and I'm going to try to sort of describe them, but because I've sold properties with aluminum wiring, and there's a whole section of Kingston's West End known as Bay Ridge that were all built in the 70s and with aluminum wiring because it was cheaper then, and I'm just going to clarify here, because I say this to every client, there is absolutely nothing wrong with aluminum wiring as a product to wire a home. The issue became that when people bought these homes, started doing renovations, introducing copper into the home and marrying the two. And then, unfortunately, issues became because they weren't done correctly in terms of marrying them together or joining them together, either at the panel or inside the home. And that, unfortunately, of course, somewhere in the US, it led to arcing or a spark, caused a fire. And then next thing you know, everything, flows through from that. And now it becomes an issue. And the ESA is the Electrical Safety Authority, which is the governing body in Ontario that goes and does these inspections to make sure that if the house does have aluminum wiring, that if there's any deficiencies, they need to be corrected. Now, the issue with the COVID and buying houses, like you say, at breakneck speed, I don't even know if the ESA is actually, I know last year they weren't even conducting physical inspections anymore because of COVID. I'm not sure if that's, I'm going to guess now, given the lockdown, shutdown, that that's not happening either. So now I know, and I don't know if LNA does this or what other insurers are doing, but I thought there was a time when, and I know I'm going to digress for a bit, but we will get back, that if, someone came to you, I bought my place, it's got aluminum wiring, and you said, okay, we'll underwrite it, but you've got 30 days to correct it. And we're still going to bind you, cover you, but you got 30 days to go in and change or do the repairs or whatever.
Sure. And, obviously I'm only going to speak on behalf of LNA Mutual Insurance, but the industry at large, that's been a bit of a moving target because when you go to underwrite a risk, LNA Mutual, we're in a luxurious position of making all the decisions right here,
right,
in Napanee. Some companies, their underwriting department is in another city somewhere,
right,
and so the computer says yes or no, and they call it black box underwriting process, and so a lot of consumers could run into that situation where suddenly everything was fine and now it's not. And, oh, why? Well, we discovered you've got aluminum wiring, and our black box says we're not insuring aluminum wiring risk.
Right.
So at LNA Mutual, we have the opportunity to say to a client, yeah, you know what? It's, we've discovered this, and we're going to give you 60 days, 90 days, whatever the case may be. And that's an example would be our fuse panels. Okay. Not a lot of insurance companies will even do fuse panels any longer. We like to give people the opportunity to say, these are old panels, and it's in everyone's best interest, including the homeowner, to get them changed to breakers. We'll work with you. We'll give you 90 days or, whatever the case may be. But yes, under the COVID lockdowns and inspections are down, people don't want inspectors in their homes. We respect that. That's understandable. And so there is a backlog. And there's a lot of people taking these, there's not a backlog in the real estate world. There's a backlog in all kinds of other places. And sooner or later, these issues are going to surface. 6 months from now, 12 months from now, a lot of people are going to be, getting letters saying, we want to see your wood stove because we don't have a certificate saying that it meets code.
Right.
And you touched on something else too, back with the aluminum wiring. Those codes are a moving target.
Yeah.
So what was okay when the selling homeowner had their wet stove put in might not be okay anymore. Technology changes and the code changes and expectations change and safety changes. So it's not unusual for the new homeowner, the purchaser, to run into these issues, and the seller saying, well, we've never had a problem before. Why would you now?
Yeah. No. And then just, I'll finish off though. So, and wet, meaning it was a wood energy technical transfer certificate. I think that's what it stands for, which is any wood burning appliances. So a wood stove, wood insert in a fireplace, anything like that. And then TSSA is the Technical Safety Standards Association for that's oil fired things. Now, the fortunate thing I'm seeing, at least in my recent experiences in the country, and we've been showing a lot of waterfront, selling a lot of rural stuff now because everybody's migrating out of the larger urban centers to the waterfront, is most people are flipped to propane, which is encouraging. So it's a gas source. It's and you don't have to worry about oil tanks or the age of an oil tank, because that was a moving target too several years ago, where some insurers say, well, if it's older than 10 years, you got to replace it. If it's older than 15 years, you got to replace it, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And that's a great point, Luca, because it's still a bit of a moving target on oil tanks and oil fired furnaces. Very few insurers will even insure a property with an oil tank on it anymore.
Wow.
It's and propane is so much safer. I handled claims in the insurance industry for 17 years. I handled far too many oil spills, and I can promise you, nobody wants to live through an oil spill lot.
I've heard of some of them firsthand. Absolutely. Yeah.
They're nothing but a nightmare. And so, but it's a great example, though, of when you're buying at breakneck speed and you love everything about a property, but it's got an oil tank, that's going to be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as far as the checklist goes, that's fine as long as the consumer understands sooner or later it's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
That's kind of the purpose of our conversation today is if clients would just think about that before, they would avoid a lot of shock.
Yeah.
And stress after the fact.
So let's go on to the also the very large insurance red flag, which is water seepage, as it's known, because I know over the last several years, with the inordinate amount of rainfall we've had, and I can track back to the September of, I think it was 2015, we had that torrential downpour for like an hour, and we had 100 millimeters of rain in an hour, and people's basements that never had water before had water, and so we'll segue into that, climate change and what's causing these sort of unpredictable weather patterns and stuff. But I know, and I obviously I'll let you speak for LNA, but I know insurers are backing off of this sort of carte blanche. Well, your basement flooded, where you're covered, right? So,
yeah. So let's start with just information I received this morning from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Okay. And they kind of oversee the entire insurance industry and provide us with statistics. $2 billion a year in catastrophic weather-related losses in Canada.
Wow.
$2 billion a year, every year. So it's not, remember the ice storm back in the 90s?
I sure do.
A once in 50-year event. That's not the way anymore. Climate change has brought us to a place now where it's predictable. It's $2 billion a year. And sometimes it's going to be wind storms. Sometimes it's going to be, the large brush fires, right? These massive fires.
Yeah.
In where we live, most of the time it's going to be flood activity. So the reason insurance companies are changing their position on flood coverage, water damage, is it's not a sudden and accidental event anymore. It's predictable.
Okay.
So it's becoming very expensive in some places and unavailable in others. So that's something that consumers should think about on their checklist. I have it third in terms of importance. If you're on a river or you live on waterfront, which is highly desirable properties, you might have a hard time getting water damage coverage, flood coverage,
right?
Or it could be very expensive.
Yeah.
Fair game if you know it in advance, right? If it's part of the cost of having those beautiful properties, then that's a decision. A lot of times consumers don't think about that until after, and they've got a low-lying property 50 feet from a beautiful dock on a waterfront somewhere. It's not inconceivable that that's going to flood.
Right.
And so in terms of where we live, most of it is heavy rainfall, where we used to have, in the spring, the last couple snowfalls. Now we're getting hard rains.
Yeah.
In the fall, or even into the winter, sometimes well into, by Christmas, it's rain. And so the water tables are higher, and people have basements that have never had water in them for 50 years and they flood.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the moral of the story on water exposure? People need to have conversations with their insurance professional. You need to talk to your agent or your broker and say, I should know this already, but I need to know what kind of water coverage I have. If I'm fully covered, wonderful. If it's not available, why? How much is it? What are the limits? Because it is the most common form of loss. It's surpassed wind.
Yeah. Well, two things. One, speaking about unpredictable weather patterns, I mean, it was just in March, like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I know I was, sadly, because I'm a horrible sleeper, but there was that massive thunderstorm in March. Like I certainly don't remember a thunderstorm, and it was violent. Like really violent, highly electrical, massive lightning, massive cracks. And I'm going, what? Like it just, it's a bit of an oddity, right? And then the point being, though, and I'm glad you raised it, because people don't ask those questions. They don't read the fine print because no one does. We all know that. I bet you I bet you a majority of the people insured now presume maybe they've got coverage and really don't have a rider for this, for for water, for this, for that, right?
Absolutely. And if you don't read the fine print, sometimes there are fixed limits. Sometimes those limits can be low, too low for a consumer. But again, at the outset, this is something you think about before you do the real estate transaction, right? Because you can find out from your insurance professional, hey, is this in a red zone where I can't get flood coverage? I need to know that. But again, like you referenced earlier, the pace of play in the real estate world, people are taking risks they don't normally take.
The other thing that started to concern me in the insurance world, and I'm not going to single out any one insurer, but there's those large franchises, that have ads on TV, and a lot of people are insured by them. You actually used to work at one of them, and and then even lenders got into it. TD has an insurance package for, it was big with Queens. They hitched their wagon in with Queens. And I know I dealt with a lot of staff and people employed at Queens that I said, who's going to be your insurance agent? And they said, well, we deal through TD Monex or whatever it was and stuff like that. So my concern was that they always felt everybody, and unfortunately it's just the way of the world, it was all about the cost of the premium. And if it was a cheap premium, then that's where I'm going to go. And the old adage, you get what you pay for. And the cheapest premium, not necessarily the best policy.
We agree with that at LNA Mutual Insurance. I mean, our mandate is for our agents to have a discussion with our policyholders once a year. It might be 2 minutes. We already know the house. You've been with us for a long time. Have you changed anything? Did you add anything special in your life that we need to know about? Or it could be, wow, you put a new pool in. That's a risk. There's all kinds of reasons to have these good conversations. In today's world, the reasons are highly significant.
Yeah.
Water exposure is a great example. In the industry, there's lots of variations in coverage. There's lots of limits. You might be paying a lot of money for it and not even know. So we believe in the value added of having those conversations.
I think I applaud that. I think that's fantastic. I just spoke with a client last week about a family properties, the trustee, and it had knob and maybe potentially some knob and tube still active. It had some asbestos wrap around some old boiler pipes. It had the alarm bells were going off, and I was going like, who's got this covered? Do you have insurance on this place? And do they know about these things? I was happy for him to say, yes, they do. And yes, it is covered. But it was probably a big premium too, but you're right. Those things, they change, and people will say, well, you know what? I finished my basement. I'm going to put in I've always wanted a wood stove. I'm going to insert a wood stove. And then they do it without even thinking about it. Right. And then something, sadly, not that you want anything tragic to happen, but something happens. And then next thing you know, they're literally left stranded.
Well, and that's the business we're in. Like, nobody wants anything bad to happen to anyone. But if something bad does happen to somebody, we want to be able to step up and say, we've had these discussions. There's nothing for you to worry about. And we're going to look after you right now.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. And so back to your checklist, consumers need to think about water exposure because it's such a common type of loss.
Yeah.
There's things in the home that you can do. You can have really good sump pumps in your sump pit, an extra one. You can, address exterior issues, your downspouts and things like that. Some of those losses are unavoidable. When you talk about those rain events,
mm-hmm.
that's where you need to have the coverage, and you need to know in advance you've got it, and then you're in good shape. For your clients too, distance from emergency services. We're talking about fire hall.
Okay. Right.
It
Yep.
doesn't
Good point.
necessarily make you uninsurable if you live in a rural area that's, you can in the middle of nowhere. Some of those are the nicest risks, right? Um, but it impacts your rate. It impacts the cost of your insurance. Yeah. So if you're a new home buyer, or if you're considering moving out of the city and into the country somewhere, just something to think about, because insurance companies look at that.
Yeah, good point. Good point. In fact, the joke was every time we saw a property that had a fire hydrant on the lawn, we always jokingly said to the client, "Hey, your insurance rate might be cheaper because you got the fire hydrant right on the lawn." So,
and the industry kind of moves around in terms of distances from the fire hall, in terms of specifics. But once you get out past 15 kilometers from a fire hall, your rates start going up. What you get.
That stands to reason.
The consideration. It's probably not a deal breaker for most home buyers, but it's something on the checklist to at least consider. Wind losses go with climate change.
Yeah.
We're seeing more wind events,
Yeah.
bursts, windstorms. So I would say, if you're buying a new home, or you're changing residence, right? It's not necessarily all new homes, but you're moving. The condition of the roof is something an insurance company is interested in now. Maybe they weren't in the 80s. Whatever your roof is, whatever it is, we're interested now.
Yeah.
Because it goes with the predictability.
Yes.
Of loss. And if you got a 20-year-old roof, those shingles are going to blow off, because we know we're getting more windstorms, and the wind is faster and stronger. So that's something to think about for a home buyer, which sounds obvious, but again, it's on this checklist. And when you get caught up in the emotional, I want that house, some of these things, slip under the radar.
Yep.
Well, another thing people don't think about, Luca, unusual liability exposures. So these would be homes. Maybe you never had a pool before.
Right.
And now you're buying a house and it's got a pool. That comes with liability exposure that you're not accustomed to.
Right.
Some homes are built on the sides of cliffs.
Yes.
Views, right? And you've got walkways going down to the waterfront. The railings and the supports and the stairs, that's a huge liability exposure.
Yeah.
So again, not necessarily a deal breaker or making things uninsurable. It's just something to think about from your client's perspective.
Yeah. No, good points.
Before they get involved in things like decking. Oh, you got a beautiful house, but the deck looks like it's 50 years old, could collapse. I mean, these are legitimate issues that people skirt over in the throes of a bidding war.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I would have those things on the checklist.
Especially coming out of COVID, when the decks are going to be jammed with people crowding around having parties. So you want to make sure they're structurally sound.
There's always that. But I just spoke to a CEO of another mutual in Eastern Ontario, and they experienced a lot of snow load damage back. Heavy, wet snow load. And so you've got outbuildings collapsing, stairs coming off the sides of properties, decks collapsing. Again, you don't want to make the process completely unenjoyable for the homeowner or the home buyer, but there are at least considerations to check off the box.
Yeah, no.
Another one that people won't think about, I know you would because of your experience in the real estate game, building code upgrades.
Yeah.
Insurance policies, some do, some don't, have coverage for building code upgrades. Why would that be important? A lot of people are buying old houses in farmhouses and in rural locations and renovating them.
Yep.
Okay. If you have a loss and you need to do a repair and it needs to meet code, it could cost a substantial amount of money to bring that up to code.
Yeah.
Some of these homes built, even before 1975, would take significant improvements to meet today's codes. Some policies have that, some don't. So that's a question, homeowners, if you're going to be renovating an old place and making it beautiful into your dream home, you need coverage for that.
Yeah.
A loss wouldn't protect you unless it's specifically indicated in the policy.
Well, and that's probably a good segue into, because we talked about this, and this was something you wanted to discuss, replacement costs, and given what's happening in the world with the cost of materials and the ability to in the event of a loss, get people back to square one, right?
Absolutely. So we're seeing a huge spike right now in building material costs. And so somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% in some industries.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you haven't had a conversation with your insurance professional about how much coverage you have on your existing home, it's time to do that, because I don't want to see anybody underinsured, right?
Yes.
Nobody wants to see anyone $100,000-$200,000 light on their coverage.
Yeah.
Stuck with a big problem. Now, in the industry, we have something called guaranteed rebuilding clause.
Okay.
Which is a nice little additional insurance blanket that consumers can avail themselves to if your property qualifies for guaranteed rebuilding cost. So that's helpful because it theoretically absorbs that additional cost. But we've been talking about rural properties. We've been talking about properties outside of fire hall distances. Not all properties qualify for the guaranteed rebuilding cost clause. So back to the conversation with your insurance professional. Does this property that I'm about to buy qualify? Can I get guaranteed replacement cost on this property? If not, why? And how much coverage do I need to be accurate then?
So question, because I actually don't know the answer to this, and now's a good time for me to find out after all these years. Owning my own properties and having my own home now. How does that value, replacement value, get established? Is that something the Insurance Bureau of Canada establishes in terms of a formula? Where does that come from?
So the insurance companies use software programs based on the actual risk, the square footage, the type of materials in play, and it provides us with a rebuild cost for that specific home, that specific risk. Now, you build in some additional coverages to give you a little bit of forgiveness because of price fluctuations. The problem is in the last 18 months, these software programs can't keep up with the inflationary impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we always put inflationary increases on, to match the cost of materials. But I would say in the last 12 to 18 months, you're looking at 40% more to build the same house as it was pre-COVID.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going through with a builder right now. Absolutely.
So if you have a home that doesn't have that guaranteed rebuild cost endorsement on the policy, you better make sure that you've got the right number, the right calculation on the rebuild. And again, that's as simple as having a conversation with a professional. This is why this is a wonderful opportunity, this podcast today, because people need to think about these things before it becomes a crisis, not after.
Yeah, no, it's too late after. There's no question about it. Absolutely.
And your insurance professional should be looking at that number for you every year to make sure you have enough coverage. And it can be confusing because in the marketplace today, it's not what you paid for the house. It's what it's going to cost to rebuild it.
Correct.
Sometimes at the consumer level, that's not always obvious for them. That's a distinction that they don't necessarily care about or understand.
Right.
And the truth is, you just need to be accurate on what it's going to cost to put that house back up for you.
Yes.
And it's worth being on a checklist.
Yeah. No.
And so I would say, in addition to the building code upgrades, just having enough coverage or making sure that you have the ability to put the house back you want to put back. Heaven forbid you had a large loss.
Yeah.
I worry for a lot of Canadians right now who might not have enough coverage.
You took the words out of my mouth. I dare say, it hazard a guess that most Canadians are underinsured.
Depending on the geography, and
yeah,
demographic, and where they got their insurance, and how often they talk to their insurance professional, Many will be covered under a guaranteed replacement cost provision.
Yeah.
Marvelous. I worry about the 20-25% of properties that don't qualify. That's still a lot of Canadians
Yeah.
who haven't thought about it in 5 years
Yeah.
and might be 25% light on coverage just in inflation, plus the 30% of the COVID impact. They could be 50% light easy. And
Yeah.
so we want to reach out to those people, and new clients of yours need to think about that when they're buying that beautiful rural property.
Yeah.
What kind of coverage does it qualify for?
So I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you touched on the fact that weather patterns are now more, in terms of the insurer's eyes, are becoming predictable risks and things that they think about. But I know, wasn't there always a clause in every policy about this act of God or some kind of, like you said, 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year natural disaster or whatever? So is that essentially getting taken out and
Yeah, that's a bit. The coverages now, the policies available in the marketplace are very inclusive and all-encompassing policies.
Okay.
Okay, which is a good thing for Canadians.
Yeah.
We want that. We don't want them getting caught in this clause and this exclusion and that exclusion. So weather-related losses, wind, flooding, right? The vast majority of them are covered.
Okay.
Okay. What we're talking about, though, is the disaster circumstance where someone isn't covered.
Yeah.
Those are the ones we hear about. Those are the ones that make the papers, right? And we don't want those. So I would say losses from weather, losses from climate change are more predictable,
Right.
but not necessarily the weather itself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
But I would just, under the umbrella of, if you have these conversations with your insurance professional, whether it be an agent or a broker, you're going to alleviate a lot of these concerns. The difficulty from your end this morning is there's not a lot of time to do that in the market these days.
Yeah.
So my recommendation is get this checklist before you start offering money on houses. Make these considerations before, so that you can in real time at least check the boxes.
100%. Yeah. No, no, really good information. And if there are realtors that watch this podcast, and I think there might be, I think this is beneficial for everybody. So,
Got a couple more. Do you have time for a couple more?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So listen, one other thing that is so important, and that is usage of the house.
Yeah. Okay.
We call it occupancy, but usage. Is this a house that's going to be under renovation? That requires a different coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a house that's going to be under virtually complete construction, right? Almost a new build or a new build? That's a different policy entirely.
Right.
Are you buying this as a rental property?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of that going on.
Yep.
So that requires a different policy as well. So clicking a box on the internet and obtaining coverage and not disclosing those pertinent pieces of information can lead to disaster.
Yeah. Well, sorry, go ahead. No, no, go.
Well, no, it's something for both the real estate agent and the buyer to consider in advance.
Well, and I was gonna go off on the tangent of investment rental properties because I operate a property management company and I own them myself and deal a lot with landlords and am selling investment properties. And I always made sure I had riders for loss of income, which isn't a common thing, I don't think, as far as, I'm not sure now if that's changed and that's more encompassing as well. But, again, like you said, you try to get a run of the mill or sort of an all coverage policy from, out there in the world or from one of these franchises. It may not necessarily have all of the things that you want with regards to a rental property. And I'm going to guess too, we might as well, now we won't spend a lot of time with it, but this whole Airbnb phenomenon in short-term rentals, I'm sure that's become a risk or more of a risk.
It is, and there are very excellent specific packages to address Airbnb and short-term rentals.
Okay.
You have to ask for those coverages, right? And you have to have those conversations. And to relate this back to the COVID situation, in terms of usage or occupancy, so many people now are going to be working from home.
Yeah.
So many people now are going to be working from home permanently, or at the very least part-time, half-time. So if you're operating a commercial enterprise
Yep.
home, that is not in the spirit of a residential insurance policy. Okay. So it's very important for people listening to your podcast to understand that this move to work from home is a wonderful thing. Protect yourselves. Get yourself a commercial policy so that you have coverages, because there are exclusions in a normal, regular residential insurance policy for business operations.
Right.
So something to think about.
You know what? That didn't cross my mind, and that's fantastic that you brought that up, actually, because that is the new way of the world.
No, this checklist isn't that bad of a thing, is it?
No, it's not. I'm going to get you to email it to me when we're done. You know that, right? So.
Absolutely. So listen, the last thing I had on the list, and it is related to the business or commercial use of working from home, and that is cyber insurance for cybercrime. So if you're going to have a business and you're going to be transactionally operating out of your house and sharing personal information of clients or customers, taking payments, you need cyber coverage.
Wow.
Specialty market. It's not included in a standard operating residential policy. And if someone hacks your computer, right, and steals data, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's the ramifications of that can be devastating and incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say on the checklist, I had it last, but under the COVID circumstance with people working from home, it might creep up in the list a little bit. Is if you're entertaining working from home and using a computer in your house to transfer digitally information for other people, you need that kind of coverage.
Wow.
That's a conversation you have with your agent or your broker. And there's great companies out there that do that kind of insurance, and it's worth every penny.
Mike, that's, you know what? And I think that's probably a good place to end it. And those are very timely and very thoughtful. And I appreciate you taking the time to make that checklist. And I definitely want you to email it to me. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we made a pretty unsexy topic pretty exciting and pretty interesting for sure. So I want to thank you for your time and everything that you've told us today.
Well, it was a pleasure. And if there's ever anything LNA Mutual can do for you, just reach out to us.
Well, and I'm never bashful of giving shout outs to those that are my guests on podcasts. So anybody listening, absolutely give Mike a call or give LNA a call for sure. So thanks, Mike. All right. You take care, and we'll talk to you again.
Take care. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye.